Court with a court-appointed attorney, Williams refused to answer any questions on why she allegedly hung up on people calling 911 for help. But prosecutors did talk to us, saying in the two cases that they've looked at so far, Williams hung up on callers using the emergency line. One caller was trying to report a store robbery that resulted in a clerk being killed. Another caller was trying to report illegal street racing. Now, on that call, Williams's voice was recorded, and you won't believe what prosecutors say they heard from Williams's own mouth.
There was one recording where she hung up on a gentleman who was calling to report people who were racing on the freeways, and after the phone call is disconnected, you can still hear her speaking, and what she says is, ain't nobody got time for this for real.
43-year-old Crenshawnda Williams, she's charged in two other cases. According to police, thousands of dropped 911 calls made between October 2015 and March 2016 are attributed to Williams. The lady who called us, Sharon Stevens, says on March 1st she passed out in her yard due to a blood clot. Her husband called 911 for help, and Williams, she says, answered that call.
She was gasping, and I could feel her heart beating out of her chest, but I couldn't get a pulse. I had Red Cross training and CERT training, right, and I kept working on her. I called 911, and she said, "This is Crenshawnda, may I help you?" I said, "Yes, my wife's passed out, I need an ambulance." When she said, "Okay," and she hangs up on me.
I was furious because he didn't tell me, because I would have gotten from my hospital bed and gone to 911 to find out who did that to me. Because it could have been somebody else and they could have died.
Yeah, now they say it took a second call to 911 to get an ambulance here. And as you can see, happily, Miss Stevens survived.
When you take a job as a 911 dispatcher, you're not just answering phones. You're stepping into a role that carries a serious duty of care and real-life consequences. Every call that comes in has the potential to be life or death, which means you don't have the option to pick and choose which situations you respond to. The responsibility is to treat every caller as urgent until proven otherwise. Gather the necessary information and dispatch help immediately. That's the foundation of the entire emergency system. When someone decides to ignore calls, hang up, or not take situations seriously, it doesn't just reflect poor job performance. It breaks the chain that people rely on to survive emergencies. This is also a profession where emotional control and accountability are non-negotiable. If a dispatcher is dealing with personal issues, stress, or anything affecting their ability to perform, there are options available, like stress leave, mental health breaks, or even stepping away from the job entirely. What's not acceptable is bringing that emotional weight into a role where other people's lives depend on your focus and decision-making. Showing up to work in that state and failing to respond properly can have irreversible consequences. And unfortunately, that's exactly what happened in this situation. Civilians did what they were supposed to do by calling 911 during a robbery to try to save someone's life. But because the dispatcher chose not to act, that person never got the help they needed. That failure highlights just how much responsibility comes with jobs like this. It's not just about answering calls, it's about maintaining public trust, ensuring the system works as intended, and understanding that every decision you make can directly impact whether someone lives or dies. When that responsibility is neglected, the damage goes far beyond one moment. It affects families, communities, and people's confidence in emergency services as a whole. And when the consequences for that kind of failure end up being something like 10 to 15 days in jail and probation, especially in a case where a life was lost, it raises serious concerns about accountability and whether the punishment truly reflects the severity of the outcome. The solution starts with accountability, but it can't end there. It has to extend into prevention, training, and structural reform. In a role like 911 dispatch, there needs to be a zero-tolerance standard for willful neglect, especially when it directly interferes with emergency response. That means clear disciplinary frameworks where repeated mishandling of calls, hanging up on callers, or failing to dispatch assistance is escalated immediately, not ignored or brushed off until something tragic happens. Supervisors should be actively monitoring calls in real time, not just reviewing them after complaints surface. Technology already allows for live auditing and flagging abnormal behavior. So if a dispatcher is disconnecting calls too quickly or deviating from protocol, that should trigger instant intervention. Beyond discipline, there needs to be a stronger emphasis on mental health infrastructure within emergency communication centers. Dispatchers are exposed to constant stress, trauma, and high-pressure decision-making, and burnout in this field is very real. But the solution to burnout isn't lowering standards, it's building systems that support people before they break down. That includes mandatory wellness check-ins, access to confidential counseling, rotational shifts to prevent overload, and leadership that actually encourages employees to take stress leave when needed. It should be normalized, not stigmatized, for someone to say, "I'm not in the right headspace to handle life or death calls today." Another critical part of the solution is training and retraining with a focus on ethical responsibility. It's not enough to teach dispatchers how to input data or follow scripts. They need to fully understand the weight of their decisions. Scenario-based training should include real-world consequences, showing how even a short delay or a dismissed call can change outcomes. This builds not just skill, but awareness. Because when someone internalizes that their role directly affects survival, it reinforces why consistency matters on every single call. There also has to be legal clarity and proportional consequences. When negligence contributes to loss of life, the legal system needs to reflect that seriousness in a way that maintains public trust. If the perception is that someone can fail in such a critical role and receive minimal punishment, it sends the wrong message, not just to the public, but to others in similar positions. Accountability isn't about being harsh for the sake of it. It's about reinforcing the standard that certain responsibilities cannot be taken lightly. Finally, public education plays a role too. People need to understand both how to effectively communicate during a 911 call and what to expect from dispatchers. But more importantly, agencies need to ensure that when the public does everything right, like calling in an emergency, the system responds the way it's supposed to, every single time. Trust in emergency services is fragile, and once it's broken, it's hard to rebuild. Final thought, what makes the situation so difficult to accept is that it wasn't a case of resources being unavailable or responders being too late. It was a failure at the very first step, the moment where help should have been set in motion. That's what people rely on when they dial 911, that no matter what's happening, someone on the other end is going to take it seriously and act. When that expectation is broken, it forces people to question something they should never have to question, whether help will actually come when they need it most. A job like this demands a level of discipline that goes beyond normal employment standards. It requires emotional control, consistency, and an understanding that your personal feelings cannot interfere with your professional responsibilities. Everyone goes through things in life, but not every job carries the same level of consequence. In this field, one bad decision isn't just a mistake. It can be the difference between intervention and inaction, between life and death. That's why the option to step away exists, and why it's so important that people use it when needed. At the same time, the outcome also highlights a broader issue about how responsibility is valued. When someone loses their life in a situation where help could have been provided, it leaves a permanent impact on families, on witnesses, and on the community as a whole. Those effects don't fade after a short sentence or probation period. They linger, and when the consequences for the person responsible don't seem to match the weight of what happened, it creates a sense of imbalance that can be hard for people to reconcile. In the end, this isn't just about one individual, it's about the standard we expect from systems designed to protect us. Emergency services are built on trust, and trust is built on reliability. Every call answered properly reinforces that trust. Every failure weakens it. That's why the responsibility attached to that role has to be treated with the seriousness it deserves at every level. From the individual dispatcher, to supervisors, to the institutions that train and oversee them. Because when someone picks up the phone in a moment of crisis, they're not just asking for help. They're depending on a system that's supposed to work without hesitation. And when it doesn't, the consequences aren't temporary. They're permanent.